Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about Office Hours and how to get involved at officehours.global. If you're interested in being on this panel, all you got to do is get here early. 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is the time that we do mic checks. You got to be here by then. The first hour is general discussion, media, virtual production, whatever you'd like to ask. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about AWS, just general Q&A. We've got a lot of questions stacking up, so it should be a good conversation about AWS. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how to get the most out of Office Hours and how people use it, and a little bit about the design of how it works. And so that should be a really interesting conversation. We're going to talk about producing 101, what to think about as a producer of events, and the things that you want to kind of be thinking through as you build your events. So that'll be the second hour on Friday. Of course, Saturday is the long day. It's going to be a little time off and then a little time on. We have the first hour, and then in the second hour we don't broadcast. That's education, and then we are going to have at noon we'll have after hours, and that's going to be we are bringing back the Belfast method. It's not in the email that went out this morning, but we'll have it in tomorrow. So you'll be able to see a concert from Belfast being switched and managed from all over the world. It's really cool. So that'll be at noon, and so we'll go through with that. Yeah, that's it. Yes, Jeffrey?
Really quick, Richard's been asking if anybody really wants to do any type of switching or anything like that, to let him know so you can get into being part of this.
While everybody gets involved with everybody watches at noon, people start working on it at like 8 o'clock in the morning. so that, there's like lots of pieces. So definitely contact Richard if you're interested. All right, let's jump into the questions, Bill.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Jim Hankins is up first from Chesterfield, Michigan, and he asked, I need to play out a video with 16 channels of audio for testing. I had intended on playout via Hyperdeck Mini or Hyperdeck UHD Pro through Constellation, then out to an AWS Elemental UHD. Anybody have any ideas?
Sorry, I was in the wrong. I was like, where are the? Nope. Okay, so multi-channel playout, and you have the new Hyperdecks, Jim?
I have one of the new Hyperdecks, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So the Mini, the Mini will output it, but it'll output it as embedded into the SDI signal, which won't do you a lot of good. Both of them will do the same thing. So what you'll need to do, the problem really that you're probably running into with the Constellation is that the Constellation will only do 2 channels out. So you can give it 16 channels, you can manage those all, but they all have to be mixed back to stereo, which is super silly. Anyway, so you can't keep those passing through. You're going to need to embed them further down the chain. There is and I can't think of the name of it right now, but there's a Dante embedder that will embed from Dante. It's an embedder and de-embedder to SDI, and it's about $1,300, I think. But what it does is that's the least expensive way to manage this. But what you need to do is you need to get those. The other thing you need to do is get them out of there first. So what we do now, you can just bypass the Constellation altogether to start with. If you just pass, you're using a link, right?
That's right.
And you have the link UHD?
I do. Yeah.
So what you can do is you can take the Hyperdeck and if you route it straight to the link as a test and just bypass the Constellation, it'll work. Like you should just get all the channels into the link, and that'll put them into Media Live. So that's the first way to handle it without spending any money. If you want to spend some money on it, that the way we do it is Softron. So Softron will it's just outputs Dante. And then our pathway is a little bit different, that we output from Softron, and then you could use that Dante embedder to embed it back into the stream right before it goes into the link. The other way, what we do is we convert, we use a Dante to MADI, and then convert it to MADI, and then put it into an FSHDR, because we're doing other things to it as well. In the FSHDR, we can rearrange all the channels. And so if we're doing a bunch of different languages or other things like that, we need to move them into channels. We can do that there. That's way overkill for what you're doing. So what I would look at is, but you need something that's going to get it out of Dante or de-embed it. So the classic way to do it would be an embedder and de-embedder. You didn't de-embed it on the way out of the playout. Get it into your mixer. What mixer are you using?
X32.
And do you have a Dante card for that?
I do. Yep.
Yeah. So you'd get it out of you'd want potentially 2 of these. I know that we're sinking into money, but you get 2 of these, and one to de-embed all of the channels out of the SDI signal, and another one to it. And then you can do whatever you want with them, effects or whatever, and then you can bring them back in. Now, the other side of that is that right now you're running testing, but what you're really going to be doing is having live inputs, right? That are coming in. So in those live inputs, you wouldn't need to de-embed anything out of the video. You would just embed it as it goes into the system. So that de-embed is just for testing, which may not be needed. But anyway, those are the ways that I know of to get. I spend most of my time doing multi-channel. So anyway, but we don't really use the audio inside of the Constellation ever. So I don't know that much about how to interact with it. It just goes. I'm still the traditional old-fashioned switcher person, which is the switcher does the video and then we put the audio in later. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Next question.
Comes from panelist Rupert McRae, and Rupert says, "Did anyone catch the Zoomtopia behind-the-scenes production presentation yesterday with Sam Kokajko? Sorry about that. From Zoom."
All right, go ahead, Grant.
I didn't catch that. So you asked a question and I just said no. Sorry, but I do have a shot from that was during the keynote, and which is always kind of weird to me. I think when you have a virtual set and then you cut to a shot like this, kind of completely takes you out of that world, and then you're seeing what's going on. But what was interesting to me is that it was totally just in webinar, and so you can't see any of the attendees, but you could tell these shot. You saw it a little bit closer. You could see this this view of a gallery view, which was literally 4 gallery views. You could still see the interface on this screen that they had, and it looked like staff. Like there was lots of t-shirts that you could see from there, and then it looked like they had this one set for a couple of the keynotes. So the CTO Brendan did one as well on this same set, but lots of them, all the rest of those sessions, they just seemed to do with virtual backgrounds, which looked pretty ordinary.
Yeah, I didn't get to see it yet. I'm hoping to go watch it. I mean, is it going to be up for VOD? Did that behind the scenes, or did we have to be there live? Do we know? Yeah, so that I don't. I'm hoping to see it. I wasn't able to see it when he did it live, but yeah, I mean they could tighten it up a lot. Like it was a huge step in the right direction not to expect to do virtual backgrounds for at least the larger ones. The problem really is that they, if you're going to have someone standing on stage, it should look like they're standing on a stage, not standing in front of an image, and that's stuff that is, and again, I know that I've been doing this for a long time. So I get a little sensitive to, vanishing points, like little things like that. But it could have been, and I'd love to, I would help them for free just so I didn't have to look at mismatched vanishing points. Anyway, next question.
Comes also from Rupert, and he asks this time, which Microsoft Surface models should be capable of sending a 1080p camera feed into Zoom, assuming that you're in a 1080p meeting?
Grant?
So I use a Surface Pro laptop, 3, I think it is. Works great with a Magwell USB converter, HDMI to USB, and that does a 1080 beautifully. So and it's an i5, so it works great.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, there is a difference between the Surface laptops and the Surface Pros. The Surface Pros have the mobile version of the chip. I can tell you from experience that the Surface Pros 3 and the Surface Pro 4 will play 1080p. They won't do it well. So I would expect, this was the i5 version that I had. I have a version 7, haven't really tested that. I would suggest something that's not on a energy saving processor. Even turned on to full performance mode, I've had lots of processor issues with those.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I haven't tested it for sure, but people tell me that Zoom has a limitation of CPU cores for achieving 1080p. And so if you have any of the Surfaces with an Intel i5 or i3 with quad core, then you get 4 threads, and if they're counting, rather than counting cores, they're actually counting CPU threads, that would get you over the 4 cores minimum, the more than 4 cores minimum required by the Zoom software to allow you in at that rate. Otherwise, it might throttle you down to 720p.
Next question.
Next one also comes from Rupert McRae, and here he says, if you needed to have live video conferencing between the participants, or 5 participants at the same location in different rooms, but you needed to do it completely offline, no internet at all, how would you do it?
Jonas?
You could either do it completely hardwired with a bunch of SDI cables, an ATEM, and do it all hardwired. If you want to have it over a network, what you could use is a completely self-deployed instance of OBS Ninja, because it can work peer-to-peer on the local network. Then you could have like pies, multiples with all those servers and configure it locally.
Grant?
Yeah, it depends on the distance. I've done a few hospital live surgeries where we had to just do it locally and send the signal from a surgery, the operating theatre, down into another lecture theatre, and we've done that in a couple of different ways in fibre connections that were great. We've also done it over NDI, which worked really well too. But I guess, and then I was also going to mention that you could sort of make Skype for Business at one point. You could do this locally, where it was only local, and that would work really easily too. But Jonas said the things that I was thinking.
Go ahead, Courtney.
What everybody else said, plus, if you want to set it up with like a F6, Zoom F6, which has auto mix in it to handle the mixing of the individual participants, it'll make it a lot easier on you, or auto mix on one of the higher end sound devices. And if they're wearing in-ear headphones, that eliminates a lot of the problems with feedback and from other rooms and echo. You really wouldn't have echo, but you'd have feedback problems. And let's see, and you just feed everything into a multi-view and pipe that out to everybody. A multi-viewer from Decimator or from Blackmagic to create your gallery view.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I have 3 different solutions, and I am annoyed that I didn't think of the one with Video Ninja. Jonas, you nailed that one. But the 3 solutions are depending on your budget level. The obvious one is with the NDI, with the vMix, with a bird dog encoder for the camera at each position, and 2 bird dog decoders at each position, one for a multi-view, one for a solo view, and then you have somebody vision switching. The variations of that is lower budget, you would be swapping to using RTSP, and higher budget, you're parking a truck outside and doing it all with fiber links.
I would probably do it with a Constellation. if you're asking how I would do it, I would do it with a Constellation. I'd run their individual feeds. I'd probably, if you asked how I would do it, I said, how would you do it? I would probably use URSAs with teleprompters for each one to get eye-to-eye contact. I'd run it into a Constellation, and I would send back use one of my super sources to build a return back for everyone to see. That would include both them as well as the program, so that they could see. So they'd see 6 windows. They'd see themselves, or they'd see themselves and the other ones, as well as the program. And then I could also change it, swap things out of what I'm sending. So I have a lot of options there. And then I cut the show, mix minus on X32 probably, for each person with in-ear monitors and good lighting. And we've done a bunch of those, not without the internet, but it does work. I will say, it's one of the things that really got me tied into, I don't want to have people in the same room, as we did some stuff for the, what was it called? The Face, I think. It was a TV show a while ago, and put everybody into their own room, even though they were all on the same floor. And the conversation was much more interesting than if they had been. When you get used to head and shoulder of every single person talking straight to each other, it's really hard to go back. Next question.
Comes from Spike Rogers in Berlin. And he says, with our business expanding, I'm finding myself doing more business tasks, sales and pre-production, than actually fulfilling any technical role on site, which is where I began. Any tips on dealing with the imposter syndrome that results?
Go ahead, Noam.
It's definitely a philosophical issue, right? Something that is in the mind, and I deal with this too. I'm sure a lot of us in the panel do, but basically you're being stretched and you're growing and you're learning something new, you're being challenged in a new way. And so you've got to essentially change your identity a little bit and saying, I'm no longer just a tech, but I'm growing into, a business person, entrepreneur, whatever you want to describe yourself as.
Bill?
Everything that you feel like you're not an imposter at, you were at one point a beginner and you had these same feelings. It's just whatever you do every day is what you finally settle into and become comfortable. I will say the whole idea of being an imposter is kind of an odd thing. I know people feel it, but it doesn't seem to me that it's really something that is legitimate when you think about it in terms of growth. You want to be growing, which means you're constantly going to be learning new things. And you're no more an imposter than any of the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that you want to find people that you can talk to about the issue, about you're going to have to figure it out, but don't try to make it all up yourself. There are people who actually understand it. Find advisors, find partners, find mentors, find other people, because you can make a lot of really bad decisions really quickly. So you may not be an imposter, but it doesn't mean you know everything either. And the thing, I've both had incredible input that saved me, and I also surrounded myself with people who were really good at numbers and did those things. And so there's definitely been a space of time that I've spent more time in numbers or Excel or Keynote than I did in graphics. But it's really important to find partners that can help you with the business end of things, because you can really make expensive mistakes quickly if you start to run it yourself. And Sky, real quick, and then we'll move on. We got a lot of questions.
Sure. I'm working on Sky 4.0 because the modifications that we have to make in today's society and world are by the minute. And so I found a way to give myself permission. And I surround myself with not just people that are wanting to say yes to me or say, you're a nice person. That's your mom. You want this ruthless review because you want to grow better. So your mom loves you, and so do we.
Next question.
Moving on, this one comes from Tobias Moore. Sorry, my mouse was just in the wrong place. And Tobias Moss, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. What are the AV careers that could be restricted to Monday through Friday, 8 to 6?
Sorry, Stuart.
I think the one that can't go away is the guys doing the prep and sending gear out at rental houses and doing the repairs at the same. They have to be where the gear is. So they're kind of stuck that way.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
CEOs hate to work on Friday through Sunday. So if you can get yourself a job at a certain company that does AV, you can definitely do that. Otherwise, you could go independent and set your own hours, and then you could do whatever you want in the AV industry. And as long as you're getting the jobs, it doesn't matter what times you work.
Go ahead, Chris.
Certainly not sports. Think about every time your friends are, around watching a game, you'd be at a stadium, switching something or shooting something. But the closest would be editor until it's not, and then it's absolutely horrible.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I would say a staff position at a post-production facility where they work regular hours, or a rental facility, as Stuart said, that are, they have deadlines and the things can come in, they open at 8 and they close at 6. So unless you're doing overnight repairs on equipment that's come in right before closing time, that has to go out the next day, you'd be pretty limited to, the AV tasks of repair or setup or checkout, that kind of stuff, but nothing live.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't know where he is, but 10 or 12 hours a day is a typical hour, so I don't know how to fit one into 8 to 6.
I think it's more that just most of our industry, you flex, it doesn't have to be that way all the time. In fact, you should try to design it so that it's not. But there are going to be sprints. And here's the deal. If you're unwilling to do the sprints, you can find a job that is doing that. It's just, there won't be very much upward mobility. There won't be, and your position will be fragile. That's and so that's what you have to take into to have that 8 to 6 experience. You're in a fragile place, because there's not that many jobs that do it. And, it's just hard. It's hard. And it's fine. Like you can find those jobs, but you're oftentimes seen as expendable, in that space, and so you just have to kind of know that that's what you're stepping into. It may seem like it's more secure, but it's potentially a government position, in those kinds of things can be, or that type of thing is the place that you might be able to find both security, but again, not a lot of upward mobility, and that's the thing you have to look at. Usually upward mobility comes with extra hours. Nigel?
Yeah, sorry for jumping in late, but I was listening to the conversation. It struck me that this sounds like it's a work-life balance conversation, and I always tell people that work-life balance is an illusion. It's really work-life choices, and at some point you can choose to work 9 to 5 because you want to, but that will limit your career potentially, and sometimes you have to choose otherwise. So don't look for balance, make choices.
And I look more for flexibility, so if I need to go do something in the afternoon, I can do it. I can go do it when I'm not in a production. I can go handle something, but then I also work at night and I work on weekends and I work on, like I do other things there. I just that my day is kind of a gel, that I don't promise anything until about 7, and so like between 5 a.m. and 7 p.m. I'm pretty. Like my wife doesn't expect a lot, but then I stop and make breakfast or make her coffee or maybe, other things. And it's really nice to have, if you're going to do long hours, it's really nice to be at home. So anyway, so that's the, it's flexible, not guaranteed. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he asks, what sort of cameras would be used for live VR streaming? Could a standard switcher switch 360-degree cameras?
Go ahead, Josh.
Well, I can speak to the switching. The answer for standard switcher, such as an ATEM, is a definite no. If for no other reason, the typical format that you have is an equatorial format. So that's where it can be broadcasted where it's a flattened out image on the screen. That won't work simply because the resolutions are too high, even to switch those.
Go ahead, Paul. Are you there, Paul?
Here, sorry. There's something called the CanDAO Live 8K. It's 8K 3D VR live streaming, and they did the PGA Tour in Europe, and it's pretty high-end stuff. It looks like it might do the job. It's pretty up there, probably financially, if you're looking at the cost.
Yeah, CanDAO has an output. Insta360 has a streaming solution. You can even stream from the. You can even. I'm going to show you an example here of. Let's see here. A new switcher. I haven't switched my switcher back. So if someone can make me host or co-host, that'd be great. So this is a example. If I am able to show this. Maybe.
There you go, Alex.
There you go. So here's an example of a switch. This is actually a live switch of 5 Ozos that are going through the Ozo was one of the few that could do 4K and could format it could format it to UHD and then re-stretch it when we streamed it. So so this was multiple Ozos. Maybe it was only 4 Ozos. But what you'll see here is we were also doing immersive sound. So this is 5 years ago at NAB. But what was the hardest part with switching, by the way, is that switching was hard, but what was difficult was you have to change the immersive audio every single time you change the camera angle because it's different. You're in a different place. So we tied the switcher, the ATEM switcher, into the Yamaha mixer, so that the mixer would literally change scenes when you cut between the two shows. This is kind of what it looks like in our little trailer back in the day that we used for this. Here you can see them kind of. We actually had one you'll see up here on a jib that was there. So this is so you can actually switch them. Unfortunately, the Ozo was one of the few that really built an SDI output that was something we could use inside of switching. So it can be done as far as the switching goes. The issue is that you need a camera that can do it. And CanDAO, I think, actually has an output that'll do that, but you are limited to 4K and potentially 8K now that the Constellation's out there. And 8K per eye is pretty good as far as how it looks. But I haven't seen anybody switch an 8K per eye. The easiest one that does a pretty high quality stream with only monoscopic is the Theta. the newest Theta is like $1,000, and it will do a pretty good job of streaming. So those are a couple options for you. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next. And Rupert says, has anyone got to the bottom of why some people recently had trouble controlling their Blackmagic cameras from their ATEM? And does anyone know why it happened?
I'm still on my little one. I haven't had time to put the big one back in. What I can tell you is that what I did was I swapped out my camera, updated the firmware to the new camera, swapped out the switcher, updated that firmware, put in a new switcher, and it still didn't work. What changed it, the two things that I changed, and unfortunately I changed them at the same time, which was not one of my smarter moves, is that I replaced the HDMI cable and I moved my camera from input 3 to input 1. And I don't know why that would make a difference, but it immediately started working again. So I'm going to go back to the Extreme, use the new cable in input 1. First, I'm going to do it in input 2 and see if it works, or input 3 and see if it works. And then I'm going to move it to input 1. So I'll have a report for you by tomorrow. Tuesday's I figured it out yesterday, and Tuesday's my meeting day. So today I'll dig into it and see if we can't figure it out. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Oculus will be streaming Billie Eilish from the Governor's Ball in New York City live in VR on Friday. What console or software would you use for a live immersive mix, and how would you split the audio from the front of house console, which is an Allen Heath dLive in Billie's case?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Kind of going back to your trailer photo, was it disconcerting or was it weird? Because it's kind of the same thing. When a camera angle changes to all of a sudden have all the audio be in a different place.
So we thought it would be, but it wasn't.
Really?
It was a really odd thing. Like, it was like, oh, this is going to really mess people up. What did mess people up was if we faded. So you had to cut it. If you faded, it was like, whoa, it would literally make you sick. You were like, whoa, that was, and your whole, your mind kind of, it would just stretch. There's lots of things in VR that you can really, do painful things to people. One of them is crossfading. An immersive mix is something that makes their head kind of twist. Other things are, things like putting, if you put a immersive camera on a steady cam, and you move really slowly, they'll start to feel it in their stomach. And then my brother has this tendency at the end of his steady cam, when he's finished, is turn it sideways like this. And we left the clip in there for the test. It was really funny to watch people immediately pull their glasses off, because it was, your whole body feels like it's turning, sideways. Anyway, so to go back to the question that Douglas had, there's a couple, I don't know enough about the Allen Heath or whether they would try to mix it. Typically what we would ask for an immersive mix is stems. You don't really want all the channels. You want them to mix the show and then send you back kind of groups of channels, and then you take those stems and you pan them into the wherever they need to go inside of a 5.1 space or more if they want to do something more complicated. If you're mixing it live, you're really going to just be managing beds. So you're going to be doing a 5.1 mix or a 7.1 mix or a 7.14 or 5.14, but you're not going to try to use Atmos, because you're trying to move those objects are going to be too hard to do. Object based, you need click tracks and automation, to do that well. So anyway, so that's the anyway. So I and then the board that is the best for this is probably the Calrec. The Calrec brand makes the best boards for that for a live. But you can definitely do it in the Yamaha, and I just don't know enough about the Allen Heath to know whether they would use an Allen Heath. But it probably wouldn't matter, because the front of house is going to do whatever they're going to do, and then you're going to get stems or raw channels, and then you're going to do what you're going to do. So but the raw channels can be and from very recent experience, I would highly recommend, if you're going to take raw channels, is to take them via analog into a stage box as opposed to MADI. Not that I'm bitter. All right, next question.
Comes from Chris Fenwick in California here on the panel. And Chris is looking for the ultimate NDI studio monitor wall recorder. Imagine a software version of what the ATEM Extreme is. I get to see all the NDI feeds and maybe even pick the ones I want to record with one big record button. Could this be built easily?
Jonas?
So while we were talking, I prepared the multiple options that there are. If you want,
while we were talking, I built what you asked for. Thanks, Jonas.
Exactly. It's up on my wall. Let me tap for it.
It's good to have friends.
The perfect multi-view, in my opinion, is the ColorView multi-view player. It's free. The cool thing is you can have multiple of those presets, but you can also create your completely custom presets, however you want to arrange your multi-views. Then there is Liveman Recorder, which is up to 16 channels, and you can record it and trigger it over a Stream Deck. And then there's a bit more sophisticated one called Direct Take. I haven't worked with that one personally, but I know people that are pretty happy with it. And you can automate a lot of stuff with this one, so it could move stuff to a different drive.
It's going to be a hard act to follow, Stuart.
I was going to tell Chris to buy a PC and install vMix, but I like Jonas's. It's better. So just do what he said.
Chris.
you know I'm a Mac user, right, Jonas? I mean, this isn't news to you, right?
This should be available on Mac.
They are available on Mac?
Yeah, I think they are.
Go ahead, Grant.
Well, I was just going to I was going to show about the Bird Dog NDI multi-view, which is $300, and so what Jonas says, I feel like I'd just fold if I was like
if you saw those cards come out,
I'm
you're
out.
like, fold.
Answer of the day.
Yeah.
That's Jonas so far is he's the leader on answer of the day. All right. Next question.
Paul Terpstra is up next from Janesville, Ohio. All of a sudden, my ATEM Mini won't connect to my network. The software just can't find it. Evidently, this is somewhat common, but none of the fixes I found online have worked. Does anybody have an actual quick fix?
Go ahead, Grant.
Well, I think to say that you've looked at all the options online, but we're going to come up with a quick fix for you. That's a big call. But one thing I have found is if you've been using a Mac to try to connect, that you can jump onto a PC or the opposite, and sometimes they see it differently. And so I have had success with that, particularly doing a firmware upgrade. It would see it for the firmware upgrade on a PC, but it wouldn't on a Mac. And so you could try that, and that would do a factory reset at the same time.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Sometimes if you're using your Ethernet and you're using a USB-C, you can get problems. But if you're using wireless, you kind of screwed up because wireless is unpredictable. Nobody on this panel likes wireless. And if I were using it, be careful you're not on a guest account because the IP will change and most guest accounts will take it right off the same network as the rest of the equipment.
Go ahead, Noah.
I'm also Mac-based like Chris. So one of the things I found is if you go to the network utility or preferences, check the hierarchy of those networks, and the network that you want your ATEM to get the IP address and talk, back and forth from has to be at the top. And so you could reprioritize those networks because I've had Wi-Fi sit on top, and that has disrupted the communication line. So it takes the highest priority to talk and assign an IP.
And one of the things that I'll do for this is that I will connect via the USB-C on the ATEM into my computer. It doesn't need a network connection at that point. And so by connecting it directly to the computer, I can go open up ATEM setup and hard code a IP number into it that's matching the subnet that I'm in. And so then I hard code that number into it, and then I put it back on the network. And usually I've had this issue, and it usually means that number for some reason is, as Noah pointed out, might be on a different subnet. So I look at what my subnets are that my Mac is on, and then I make sure that the ATEM is on the same subnet, because if they're not, you won't be able to see it. And so that what Noah said is probably a similar problem. But anyway, the way to get to it, if you can't get to it and you need to reset something, is just use the USB-C, because it'll bypass that. A lot of times, if they're on the same subnet, it'll see it no matter what. In ATEM setup is able to oftentimes see it's oftentimes able to see the ATEMs whether you have the IPs or not. Next question.
Mike Emmett, Melbourne, Australia, comes in with, how do you deal with audio from a speaker who sound checks well with decent dynamic range, but turns out to have an unexpectedly loud laugh and finds their show co-host really amusing?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so there's a couple of hardware solutions. If you are recording, if you just need it for recording later, a lot of recorders have a 32-bit float, which is helpful. You can fix that in post, or they'll have a second safety track. It's typically 10 dB lower than the original track. If you don't have that, you can try and record a second track. If it's live, you can have a second audio track, have that about 10 dB lower, and you'd have to ride the fader between the two.
Go ahead, Grant.
I'm guessing it's probably a wireless scenario, and in that case, you're probably blowing out the capsule or the transmitter gain, which can be a problem during a show. Ultimately, it comes down to pre-production, right? It's the rehearsing that happens before, and inevitably, the person when they do a short sound check, they sound nothing like they do when they actually do their presentation. And so my encouragement is to have as much time as possible to get them talking, and ideally get them laughing, get them doing all of what they will do during the show. Have a conversation, have all that going. You'll pick up that laugh, and you'll end up dropping the gain on the transmitter.
Go ahead, Bill.
All of what everyone has said. Plus, we talk a lot about on the show about gain structure and setting audio terms. And that's one of the reasons that we are really precise about that. You want a little bit of room to increase volume, but you also want a lot of room to pull it back. So if you properly set gain structure on a fader or something like that, you should have quite a bit of room to bring it down. So if somebody is monitoring in real time and hears that huge laugh coming, they have a lot of room to diminish the signal.
Go ahead, Noah.
I did an interview with Jay Leno, and that was one of the big issues we had. Is he was very dynamic with things he would talk about, and so the solution we had was basically put two lavs on him, a hot one and a backup one for his loud laughs. So obviously we recorded both of those. Another thing that's huge is compression, and then limiters, of course.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead, Chris.
Along with what Grant was saying, I like to encourage people to get mic'd up early and listen to him talk. There's also some good tricks. If you say, hey, can I get a level from you? They're going to go, huh? I need to check your mic, check my mic. Ask them to do something simple. Like, could you explain how to drive, say, from your house to the local grocery store? And you'll get a chuckle out of that because it sounds like a weird question, but you also get to hear them actually speaking. And I do little tricks like that. How did you, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Tell me what you cooked for breakfast. Just little things like that to get people to actually have a conversation with you.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, if you're using something that has A to D converters early in the chain, there's things called look-ahead limiters that actually look at the signal coming in before it passes it along, and it delays it just a few milliseconds, and it can limit those peaks and keep them within the boundary of your channel. But you run the risk of hearing it pump, and so you have to kind of adjust them fairly carefully.
There's almost no show that we don't have a limiter on, so that they can squash up against that limiter. And usually a lot of times what we have is, to Noah's point, is a compressor that sits at negative, oftentimes like negative. It's 18, and it's like a 2 or 3 to 1 compressor that's just going to kind of pull things together. But at the very top, there's like a 10 to 1 compressor at -3 that you're just not going to go through, and that keeps people from overmodulating, which is what we're mostly worried about. Next question.
Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C. is up next, and he says, a house of worship client is looking to move towards an automated embedded daily solution. Is there a CDN, content distribution network, that will have a constant embed for live content and will go live with constant stream parameters automatically? Twitch can, but aesthetically it just doesn't fit.
Go ahead, Grant.
Do you know, it's not normal that we have such a long time ago a service that did this perfectly, and now we don't. Livestream.com, in 2009 I started messing around with that, and they had exactly this service where it was you could set a whole playlist of videos that would play out live, and then you would go over the top with a stream key, and it would then play, and then as soon as that live had stopped, it would go back to playing that pre-recorded content. And now I think we could talk about it more with Media Live in AWS, but I think the cost of that would probably be cost prohibitive for a daily show for it to be 24 hours and for a house of worship. But anyway, I wanted to reminisce a little bit about live stream broadcaster that did it better than what it does now.
Yeah, Jonas.
In theory, AWS IVS can do it, or you can roll your own with a media package. With all those media services, they can do it definitely. And if it's just like 2 hours per day, it might actually be in the budget.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
First of all, Andy, happy birthday. YouTube does have that ability to have an embed code, an instant embed code in there. If you want to do a little bit more, I know we don't talk too much about Telestream because of the Wirecast, but Telestream on the other end of things for live broadcast has a lot of great programs that you can use. It's going to cost you a little bit, but they might have discounts for house of worships.
Ustream was bought by IBM and still has the ability to kind of just have a constant URL, and it's still the same old, I think, wowza transcoders that they were using before. But nothing has really changed that much there. But it is a service that you can buy. You probably, the other thing is that if there is a social service that you like, you can program it through AWS. So most of them have APIs that would let you do that. Like for instance, YouTube, we're working on something right now, but you can basically hit go and it'll go build an event in YouTube and start streaming to it, and with whatever parameters that you'd like. So you could build that, and that would not be that expensive to use something like YouTube if there's if YouTube fit what you were trying to do. And of course you could embed that YouTube into your page. So that would be another way to kind of manage that process. And so it can work. I would take a hard look if you're building a lot of content. I would take a hard look at the Vimeo solutions for over the top, the OTT, the Vimeo OTT solutions. Really cool. You can build for a relatively inexpensive. I mean, to build an app, like a real app, costs money, like $150,000, and theirs is like $6,000. So you can build this thing that you can send out to your parishioners that is on their Apple TV or on their Roku or on their whatever, all of them at the same time. You can update content, you can stream live to it, you can manage subscriptions, or donations, like whatever that is. All of those things can be done through that system. So as you start to look at that, you may want to look at you may want to consider looking at that solution too. Go ahead, Grant.
I forgot about Vimeo and that whole thing, and we went down the whole OTT line as well, and we were in the teens of thousands, not the six when we looked at it, but even then it is very good, and particularly with all those different devices.
It's per platform.
Sure.
So
yeah. But if you weren't going to go that way and just kind of stock standard Vimeo, you can just stream to an event, and so that event can be embedded, and you can constantly hit that same stream ID, and it'll create a new video. And the cool thing is as well is that's creating a playlist, and if you like, you can enable it so that it plays the most recent on-demand version of what you've just finished. So it could accomplish kind of what you're thinking about with being able to play back on demand as well as be ready to then come back live.
And a lot of times what we do with not so much with embed codes, but with whole pages is to just build a redirect that the system is looking for. Here's a URL that I'm always going to go to from a programmatic perspective, whether it's a page or whatever. And then we behind it change whatever that update is quietly. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, back again with why might one of two identical Zoom rooms not show the share button in a meeting? And he notes different meetings, same meetings, host or participant, account owner or guest, all of that makes no difference.
Grant?
I find that the update setup is weird, all right, on the Zoom rooms. Sometimes you have to push it in the web admin. You've got to say, I want you to update to the latest version, and it can take a while for it to do that. And so often when I do, I want to have no meetings happening and I leave it overnight for it to actually do the update. Of course, you could just go to the zoom.us downloads and download the latest version and make sure that it's exactly the same version. But definitely versions and activation codes and things like that can be wacky in those differences between them.
Go ahead, Jonas.
There are some settings that allow you to disable sharing. It could have something to do with that. There are settings to disable sharing for private meetings and public meetings. So maybe it's that.
Next question.
It comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris asks, has anyone tried topdirector.com? And he gives the link there. It's a switching app on iOS, and it has native NDI and Tally support. Is this going to be the wave of the future for software switching SRT and NDI support everywhere?
It looks pretty cool. I was a little distracted on the last question because I was up there looking at it. It looks nifty. It looks like something we should maybe we should get those guys on, have them show it off, and then we can figure it out. It's definitely within our pipeline. If people are interested in that, go ahead and throw it into the second hour suggestions. And if we get a couple upvotes, we'll reach out to them and see if we can't bring them on. But it looks like a cool platform. It looks like something cool implementation. Next question.
Chris Fenwick is up next from here in the panel and in California. Alex, what's the deepest you got into developing a new workflow technology that you implemented once that you couldn't turn into an ongoing service for other clients?
I was thinking about this when you were showing your trailer. It's like, wow, you put a lot of work into that.
But
I hope
we used
you
that
did
trailer.
a lot of Ozo shows like that.
We did a fair number of Ozo shows.
Oh,
so
good.
we did,
Okay.
so it paid itself off. Now the trailer itself was just a standard trailer. The great thing about the Ozo is it didn't require us to do a lot of customization. Like they just looked like cameras to our routers. And so everything, it wasn't specialized. So that trailer could do 360, but it also did a ton of work. But we helped launch the 360, we didn't help launch it, but we did the first 360 stream for Facebook, on Facebook Live, 360. And that was in the middle of Utah but here's the worst part. Not in that trailer because the trailer couldn't get there because it was in this Mars simulation location that you couldn't get to with the trailer. So we had to build it out. But anyway, but we did, so the irony of it is we built the trailer that was able to do it. We only used it 2 or 3 times for 360, but we used it a lot all over the place for lots and lots of streams. It was a very valuable build. I'm trying to think of things there's a lot of things that we did that you think we thought the 360 would be fun. We built up a lot around stereo, before that. And that was before a lot of our streaming, but it was stereo production. Basically all of Conduit was built up for stereo, and it was used for a little while, but it never really took off. So, but it paid for itself. Most of the things that I've done have paid for themselves to be developed, and then they just didn't. They didn't go any further. So I don't know of that many. I think the biggest one, I guess, would be we got really deep into the AR solutions, the LiDAR AR solutions around the Google phones, and built some incredible proof of concepts, 5 years ago. So they were, just you could put on goggles and wander around a virtual museum because we had a mocap system. So you could literally have a 30 by 30 space and put virtual sculptures, and we were using Zimbabwean sculptures that we had digitized, and put them into the space, and you just wander around and see them and get information about them and all this other stuff. And it felt like you were in the museum space inside of your Samsung Gear, I think at the time, and using Unity or whatever. And so that one didn't go anywhere, but a lot of times it didn't go anywhere then. So all the things that we know about that we learned are useful now. So a lot of dead ends are just dead ends because, the nutrients weren't there for that to grow at that moment. But it rarely means that they're never going to grow. Like all the stuff we did with stereo, we use in VR. All the stuff we did with AR, we're using right now in AR and VR. All the stuff we did with 360, so those, just because it doesn't turn into a business doesn't mean it's not useful somewhere at some point in time. It's just, you just stack that knowledge and put it back in the library and wait for it to be activated again. So next question. It's a good question. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again. He says, in a discussion about the importance of GPS to the broadcast industry, it was said that it was needed for synchronizing audio and video sources. Why is it that when the ATEM units and mid-low range audio consoles we use don't need an external reference anymore?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, this is actually a complex question, but I'll try to keep the answers succinct. Firstly, the GPS in broadcast is used to sync broadcast centers. It's not just one device, it's all devices in that center. When you're using something like an ATEM Mini, or going all the way back to the data video and Videonics SVHS mixes of the 90s, the first digital mixes, they had frame stores built into them, and they would store one frame of video at a time, sync them up, and then pass them into the video processing. These sorts of devices in broadcast are seen as an input device that will then feed into a proper frame store and then go into the broadcast environment. A lot of the devices in that broadcast environment don't have frame stores. They want the video in and out as fast as possible with the minimum delays. So they are all GPS synced. They are all gen locked together to make sure that things happen instantaneously across the entire chain.
Yep, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, what Stuart said about was pertinent to live broadcasting, but in production, a lot of times you'll have situations where you'll be shooting multiple cameras, like out in the desert, and you're going to put one camera position up on the top of that butte over there with a long lens, and another, the sound guy's going to be down here, and then the other camera guy is going to be way over there. And GPS, you can use GPS receivers to get everybody on exactly the same time code without having to worry about jam sync and then walking away. If you forgot to jam sync, you're not going to want to climb down the side of that mountain to plug into somebody to synchronize it. So with GPS, satellites are generally viewable anywhere where you can see the open sky. So they serve that to get a common time code between all multiple cameras and sound recorders, so it can be used for that as well, besides the frame synchronization for live broadcast, which is what it's used for in broadcast.
Next question.
Aaron Houslage in Durham, North Carolina says, how do people use Stream Decks and Wacom tablets to streamline editing?
Stuart?
Well, the Stream Decks are used as macro buttons. So instead of having to hit multiple key presses, the common buttons are right there. The Wacom tablets, I've tried to use a tablet in Resolve, in Edius. It is a nasty experience. You will use your mouse more on sitting on top of the tablet. If it's a tablet that's got the video surface in that you can use touch features to scroll back and forward, then it becomes a little bit more intuitive. But trust me, when it comes to your average tablet, they're fine for photos. They're not fine for video.
Go ahead, Chris.
You know, the Wacom tablet for editors became a thing in the mid 90s when, I guess it was the Flame. Everybody was, doing their Flame thing. And I don't understand why it became a thing. I did it for a while, but what you find with a standard tablet, which is, some of them are 16:9, some are still, I think, 4:3, is that when you edit on two displays, I now have to map all of the pixels of two displays, which is effectively 32:9, not 16:9, onto one display. It gets really small on the tablet and it becomes problematic. Some people don't care that when you draw a circle, it looks like an oval on your screen, which blows my mind. I don't understand it, but I think tablets and editing is kind of silly.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Everybody's different. Every editor's different. I've been in big editing shops where literally almost a third of the people had tablets, usually Wacoms, usually off to the side, and they had one hand on the keyboard and one on the Wacom. I know a lot of people use mice. I have stopped using any of those, and I just use a trackpad because it's the same as my laptop, and I want everything to be the same. It's individual. Everybody has their own style, and you just have to allow everybody to edit with what they've been myelinated to use.
Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
I started using the tablet 20 years ago on the Avid DS, and this is not the Cintiq, which is the monitor that Alex uses. This is the big monitor. And yes, you're right, Chris. I do only use the middle part, and I reposition in the software that I only use that, but I fly across 3 different monitors. And the reason it was started was because the interface on the Avid DS at the beginning with Softimage was so tiny. You couldn't get to it. So you had to articulate. So I've been using this. I don't have carpal tunnel. It's just a natural thing. So I guess I'm silly.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. What are the new Facebook portals that just got announced?
Go ahead, John.
I caught this live stream that Zuckerberg did. There's a Portal Go, which is completely portable with the battery in it, 10-inch screen, and a 14-inch Portal Plus that is the new replacement for the larger one, and the screen swivels up and down. I just wish Facebook could do a live stream properly one time.
Oh, was it rough?
It's horrible.
There was a time when they did live streams properly. I just want to say. Anyway,
Don't tell me. That's when you used to do them, right?
No comment. Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California. Up next, have we done a second hour on VR streaming production?
We haven't. We'd have to find some folks that have done it recently. I have to admit that I haven't streamed VR. I mean, I streamed a lot of VR for a while, but haven't done it for a couple of years. And so I'd have to kind of make sure that we have people that are ready to turn that back on. I can talk a lot about it, but I don't know what the newest tools are at the moment. Because most of the stuff that we've done, we've moved to, I guess, still VR streaming, but 180s. 180 has kind of taken over 360 because the resolution is higher and it's easier to produce. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael again. This time he asks, where have you seen Waves SoundGrid used in the field other than live plugin processing versus Dante? And have you seen it used for audio distribution within a venue, for example?
Oh yeah, we've seen Waves in the field. It's never been good, ever. I'll just let you know that, when we see a Waves operator show up at one of our events, that we're going to get audio from, we just know that there's going to be some point in our setup where there's 2 hours of why I just can't figure out why it's not working. It's always the same. The operator will always be like, I just can't figure out why it's not. It should be doing the thing it's supposed to do, and they're pushing a little glass thing, and it doesn't work. And so we've often gotten good at routing around them so that we give them back things, and we go, hey, why don't we put a couple things in here? And that couple things is I don't have to actually get anything from you directly, and you can manage the house because we just can't have our stream connected to that. So anyway, it's good for a lot of things. Putting it in the field in a venue has been super unsuccessful for us. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Terpstra in Janesville. And he says, what light is recommended for lighting the background?
I think it depends on how big the light is and how much you want to light it up. I'm using a mix panel 60, which is crazy overkill for what it is. I just have one that propped up nicely behind mine. I think that the Pavo Tube 6Cs work really well because they give you a lot of different color options, one or two of those. I wouldn't get the bigger ones because they're just hard to kind of manage, inside of that. Next, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if the 60s overkill, then the 150 that I have that's behind me is really overkill.
Yeah, that's way overkill. They're great because they're DMX and there's a bunch of other things to them there.
Yeah, what we're seeing fly off the shelves is the Aperture P300 for bigger productions, that
Right.
light. Well, we're seeing Ken use, I think, 2 of them, and I believe also Jim Hankins is using, where's Jim? Oh, there he is. Jim, is that a P300 behind you?
It is.
There you go. And how much are the P300s?
I think they're $16.99 without the case, and then another 200 with.
Yeah, and I think the Mix Pre 60 is a little less than that. I think it's in the $800 range or something like that. But the Pavo tubes are like $100 or $150 or something. They're relatively inexpensive, for that process. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, let's say you wanted to do Mad in the Kitchen 2.0 with a small audience in the studio. Could you easily get portable natural gas supplies and cooking appliances delivered to the show site? How would you make the set safe for cooking?
Go ahead, Courtney.
There's lots of little portable propane burners that you can get that just open up and have a little canned propane in there. And plus, there's in LA, there's rental houses that supply, jade ranges, big fancy stoves with propane connections to them. You just have to be careful about always put a carbon monoxide detector in the studio with you, and try and have a vent hood with a forced air vent to the outside world to remove any of the carbon monoxide that might build up. A properly adjusted stove will have very little of it, but you still have to take that into consideration. And there are companies that rent just a propane tank and a hookup for that you can run any gas range on. Or you can run electric ranges, but you got to have 220 three-phase.
We're just going to go 5 minutes over, but we are going to try to move through it pretty quickly for these questions. Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
Yes, we go to Mad Marchness on the Mad in the Kitchen website, and you'll see see Madeline using a small 1x1 little canister of propane, and we were using it outside of a pizza oven right behind us, which we had done previously. But Mad Marchness, you'll see an example of that.
Just remember, if you're doing a show that you're trying to broadcast and you put an audience into it, you've immediately taken your online audience and put them in the kiddie table, like literally for a cooking show. Like it's a horrible idea. Like, it's do not put people in the audience. So you want to put, I would highly recommend, if you want to have interaction with your audience, that you put screens up that they can see someone on Zoom or whatever, but you want to draw them through the cameras. Not draw them to the people in the room. It's just if you want the online to be successful. I mean, if you're putting a handful of people in to the room that are paying an enormous amount of money to be in that room and paying for the whole event, but most likely the online people would pay for the event, their presence there. And so you want to make them the first-class citizens, not the kids in the table that is at the end by the fireplace, squashed up against it. So anyway, that's my recommendation. All right, now we're now changing subjects and moving on to our questions around AWS. So once a month, we are going to do this AWS discussion, and we have a lot of people doing different things in AWS, and a lot of those folks that are doing that are up here with us today. And so it's a great place. I just feel like we just have to keep on, trading notes and figuring out what's going on, and just an open Q&A without a lot of other things there. So definitely stay tuned for that. And we're going to go ahead and jump into it. Let's jump into the first question.
Absolutely, Alex. The first one comes from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo says, has anyone delved into the world of Amazon CDI as a method of cloud video transport?
Go ahead, Jonas.
I keep looking at it, and then I'm searching for applications that support it currently. With the new VT instance, it might become more interesting to serve your streams over to a VT instance and have an output from your main instance to the VT instance over CDI, because both CDI and the VT instances support 4K 60 HDR, which is an interesting format to support.
Next question.
Liberty White is up next, our friend in Atlanta, Georgia. What is the most challenging cloud production that you've done, and what did you learn from it?
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the most challenging ones was probably the John Barker one, just because we had to redo the whole infrastructure in about an hour. What we learned from it is a good team and a process is really, really valuable. Instead of batching something together, that's great for figuring it out, but then building a process to building that system is a great way to keep up.
Absolutely. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. Will the AWS donation through TechSoup cover costs for the virtual productions we're experimenting with?
Jonas?
It could handle about 4 productions per month if we run about 5 different servers.
Can you explain what the TechSoup, I don't quite understand what the question is.
If you have a non-for-profit, you can request credits from AWS, and you get $2,000 per year. Again and again, over TechSoup, they charge you $100 for it.
Interesting. Yeah. Next question.
Chirig Cheetah in Dallas asks, Jonas, can you show us how you use Cloudflare for remote access to Companion in AWS?
Yeah, so this is one of the cooler things that Cloudflare announced just a few weeks ago, is they now have so-called quick tunnels. As soon as I downloads. And what this enables you to do is you just download the Cloudflare exe, then you say you want a new tunnel. Then you can say, for example, I want to share my my Companion that runs on local host, should be 888. And I'm not logged into anything. I just press enter and it's requesting a new quick tunnel. We have been doing this before with an account, but the great thing about this new method is that you now can do it without an account. So if I now go to this website, you see, or anybody that has the link could go to this website and just go to the emulator and remotely control my Companion. if you want to step that one up, then you can put Cloudflare Access in front for management with an SSO and make it more secure, or make it even last longer, because this one will go away as soon as I kill the process.
And that's not just for Companion, that's for ATEM software control, Bird Dog, anything on your network. So it's pretty
Stream
amazing
Deck?
stuff.
Stream Deck?
That's what he was just showing, was the Stream Deck.
Yeah.
Do you know if is that doing a port, like doing a plug and play, opening a port? Do you know?
Oh,
Through the
it's
router?
a tunnel into Cloudflare's network, and then they are tunneling the traffic back. You can also share a whole like CIDR with everybody, and then connect to it. They basically want to replace VPNs. And it works pretty well. I've been using it for almost a year now, but now they released that you don't even need an account to try it out.
That's great. Very cool. Next question.
Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. Has anyone used Amazon Interactive Video Service in virtual production as a content distribution network or otherwise?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Used it once, works pretty well. As soon as you really go into it, you wish you would configure more. So I would advise you to try it out and then see what it does with their script, because all it does, it spins up the media live channels and everything behind you without telling you. So you can look at how they set that up, note it down, and then recreate it yourself, and you will be way more happy.
What is IVS? Can you explain a little bit what is it designed for?
Interactive Video Systems is basically a service that allows you to spin up your own CDN from RTMP ingest to delivery over HLS. They have their own player that you can use for that. They have some functions for that player that you can insert events, captions, all that is possible. It's all built on the media live workflow, but it's subtracting all of that below a nice clean interface where you say, I want a channel. It gives you a channel. You take an RTMP URL and get an HLS URL with all the additions. And
very interesting. But it's mostly just a kind of an automator for things that are already there.
Automates
the process.
Stuff.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I know what you're thinking, Alex. Fenwick doesn't know anything about AWS or
I did think
CDNs
that
or
actually. I was like, this is. I was like, I wonder what he's going to say.
So I want to nominate, when we make Office Hours the spy movie, that we cast Jonas as the hacker guy. That he's the guy that always has the solution. He goes, oh, I can get in there. So he's the guy. When we make Office Hours the spy movie, he gets that role.
Does he have an energy drink on his desk, though? If he doesn't,
multiple,
he can't.
and most of them are empty.
Okay, there you go.
He needs a furless cat, too.
All right, very good. All right, next question.
Chris,
I knew that there was no way that Chris was going to come and give us an answer about IVS. When I went to it, I was like, there is no way. If he does, my mind might have blown off my head, like just like, anyway. So
I'm surprised you clicked my name.
Go ahead. Next question.
Chris in Atlanta is up next. Does anyone have a cloud formation or some other script type thingy they're willing to share that will spin up a vMix instance?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Sure, again, I worked on a script for about a year now. We're not giving that away for free, but you are able to buy that from us.
Next question.
Guy Cochran here in Seattle here in the panel says, can we save a bit by using the new VT1 instance types for streaming production instead of the typical G4DNs?
Go ahead, Gron.
I mean, it sounds like that's exactly what the marketing was. When I read it, it was like you can save specifically, like 40% or something. And so it'll be interesting to try it out. I tell you what I have tried just recently, which is not graphics supported, but the T3. I spun up a T3 small, specifically to do Zoom. So it would have Zoom running on it and had Unity comms and VB cable, so that I could just listen to a Zoom breakout room back in Unity comms, and it worked perfectly. And I ran it all day, and it cost me 17 cents. And so it's really interesting. Some of those other instances, it seemed to be a newer one that kind of will automatically scale a little beyond the resources that it's set to, but it looked like when Zoom and Unity are running that it was not going over that limit, and that's why it was super cheap. So it's kind of related.
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things, it's not as easy with the VT instances. We go into a much more deeper engineering. You need to either use the SDK or a special FFmpeg build to use the accelerator card. But that's where it becomes really interesting. Twitch switched their infrastructure to the VT streams so that they can just transcode a way more streams. It's faster than real time, which is useful for file transcoding. But also I could see it being used with CDI because it can convert multiple 4K streams.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, so it looks like, just from a pricing standpoint, when you compare the two side by side, they're pretty similar. The text, though, does say that you could save up to 30%. There are some additional features or something new here called, I don't even want to try to pronounce that, U30 media accelerator cards that are dedicated to HEVC. So those might be helpful for if you're doing 1080p or 4K stream. So that's what these ones are. They're dedicated machines that can handle streams specifically. So there's a 3X large, a 6X, and typically we've been using a 2X. So that one's about 75 cents versus 65 cents. I don't know how they get the 30% savings off of that. Yeah, you can see the pricing. I'm about ready to change one of mine. So you can just take an instance type that, like I have a G4 DN 2X, so I'm about ready to swap its head essentially and change it over to a 3X, and then go ahead and apply it and see. Oh, it's not going to let me. Windows Data Center is
It's
not.
the VT instances only support Linux. They are not
right?
Windows compatible. Yeah.
Ah, well, there's that. So we can't just swap them over. Wah, wah, wah. All right, we'll try again.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah, it's not as they have a. We are not sure which GPU they have in them yet, but you definitely can't run Windows on them. I tried this morning. But for Linux, it will be really interesting to build like an Nginx RTMP server or something on top, because it can handle that many 4K streams.
Next question.
Danny
go
Law
ahead,
and
go ahead, Guy. What were you going to say before? Oh, can't hear you, Guy.
It does say that it's in certain data centers. So the data center that I'm in, which is US West Oregon, doesn't have these types. So that's the error that's getting thrown up. So I just need to switch data centers and see also what happens. But yeah, Jonas is right. I can't just switch, but that's why we hang out in these groups and do these updates. So we know.
Save us a lot of time. That would have been like a half an hour of I can't figure out why this isn't working. And it was just shortened to a minute. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, has anyone within office hours tested out Harrison Mixbus VBM from AWS?
I have to admit, I don't even know what that is. So has anyone used it, or can anyone let us know?
It seems like a really expensive version of Harrison Mixbus, especially built for using NDI in the cloud and being used in the cloud. It's contact us pricing, so of course it's broadcast pricing.
I mean, it would be kind of interesting to see what they do. You know, I mean, that'd be another one. If people are interested in that one, that's another one of those ones that I'd love to bring them on for an extra hour. We learn what they're doing and how it works and what the features are and everything else. If people put it into the second hour and vote it up enough, we'll reach out and see if we can't bring them on. Next question.
Frojon Brownwell in San Diego says, is Mukana run from AWS? And if so, does it use AWS Edge CDN abilities to have multiple geographic locations?
It is on AWS, or part of it is, but only for our external clients. I think it's the Mukana itself is on our little server. The load on the server is almost negligible. So it's a very, very light app. So it's easy to run. We haven't had any real issues under 200,000 users. Next question.
Chirik Cheetah in Dallas, Texas says, thoughts on when to use AWS media services, Media Live and so forth, versus using AWS IVS, the interactive video service.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think Jonas touched on this a little earlier, but essentially you can think of IVS as kind of Amazon Video with training wheels. with some extra magic for allowing interactivity via their player. Whereas media services kind of gives you the whole ball of wax. You can do many more advanced things. The nice thing about IVS is you can get started right away. So you can get an endpoint to stream to in seconds and be off and running. So definitely worth checking out.
Go ahead, Jonas.
And one of the differences is that IVS is tuned for lower latency, and they have made the ingesting events into the HLS stream easier.
And when you say lower latency, what do you mean?
I think 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think that the thing I have about lower latency is just that I think that it reduces the user experience because it just gets rid of all the buffer, and so we're going to get rid of all the buffer. And the reason that people need it is because they don't have good comment management. Like that's once they figure that out, then you don't need, it doesn't matter anymore. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next and says, AWS has an edge network location in Taipei, Taiwan, but does not have a region available in Taiwan. What implications does this have for producers or applications originating from Taiwan or targeted to the Taiwanese market?
Go ahead, Grant.
So AWS has all these, particularly for CloudFront, all these edge locations that are caches. And so something like 200 or something around the world. And the thing that happens though is that they have a connection from that edge location through to their network, through to their regions, and often is more of a direct connection, which is doing less hops. So I actually saw a really interesting talk by Slack and kind of the developers of Slack that run the servers, and they were talking about using CloudFront, which is normally caching. But they used CloudFront and they turned off the caching element, or at least they set it to 0. So it was never actually caching files. And they saw a ping kind of drop by about 20 milliseconds across their network because the end users were hitting those edge locations, and now they're on the Amazon network, on the AWS network. It was faster than people going directly to the regions, and so it's really interesting. So it doesn't need to be a region; it can just be an edge location to speed up your the round trip.
And for our producers, we'll probably run a little short if we don't have more questions. It's up to you. But if you've got questions about AWS, this is a good time to ask them. All right, go ahead. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, would grouping of all of your resources into a single AWS organization be a beneficial way to keep control of costs?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, it's more along the lines of centralized billing, which is one of the requirements of the AWS organizations. That is where you can leverage the multiple organizations and resource reservations, like reserve instances for EC2 or RDS. So the answer would be yes.
Go ahead, Jonas.
And it's not really, while you can keep control of costs a bit easier because you could just shut down a whole account. So for example, if we have multiple volunteers trying stuff out for office hours and we have it and then an office hours organization, each of those sub accounts could have like a limit associated. And I'm pretty sure we could build a self-destruct button that just kills the account as soon as you reach $30 or something.
Right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. How are AWS organizations used? Jim Hankins mentioned them as a way to keep control over all the services you use.
Go ahead, Jim.
Sure. So I'll leave a blog article that covers a myriad of different ways, but you can think of it essentially as an organizational tool that will map into your company or organization's business model, or if you're a development firm, your software development lifecycle. So you can have things like development and QA and test, and the blast radius for those changes stays within these sub accounts. And then kind of a fringe benefit of that as you start to work in the console. When you're dealing with a clean account, you're not having to search through really long lists of security groups that have been done by somebody else. It's just your account, and you don't have to worry about bumping into somebody else. So, but yeah, the blog article covers a ton of different use cases, and I'll drop that in Makana.
Okay, next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville in California says, has anyone used a software embedder that can encode multi-channel audio other than MediaLive or FFmpeg in AWS?
Go ahead, Jonas.
vMix actually does it. They're probably cheating and using FFmpeg somewhere around there. But what I have done is getting Zoom ISOs into vMix. And then the vMix SRT output, you can select that you want to send, I think, up to 8 channels. So we then send out an SRT with 8 audio channels down. Then my local vMix machine receives that and can output it to Dante or whatever. And the idea was that in theory, by leaving it together, somebody could mix it on the ground with a QL1 because some A1s still like the QL1 and really want to stay on that one. Then send it up again to stream with the master.
Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York says, are there any security considerations when using AWS for production to keep hackers or attackers out?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes, you should definitely consider security. It is in the internet. It's as open as if you would attach anything else to the internet. Don't open anything that you don't need to open. I know that in troubleshooting, often the first step is let's disable all the firewalls and see if it works then. Remind yourself to re-enable the firewalls. It's really helpful. And one of the things you want to keep in mind is if somebody you got hacked, you killed a VM, that's not too bad. But if client files get lost, you don't want that. Even on S3, you could have an encryption attack. Or if somebody just takes over your account and suddenly starts mining Bitcoin, that will be expensive for you.
Grant?
Yeah, in the security groups, it's really easy to set the origin to your own IP, and so instead of just allowing it to come from any IP, if you're only doing traffic that's just, particularly in virtual production, you're really just connecting into that and that's it. It doesn't need to go out. You can set the port and you can say only my IP, and if there's someone else, then add that port again and add their IP and just lock it down to the IP addresses of people that can access those services through those ports.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I see a lot in some of these smaller teams is passing out credentials in a secure manner, and ensuring that you're not passing root credentials to the entire AWS account. So least privilege. There's a really great article and some documentations, security frameworks. I'll go ahead and drop that link into Makana that covers things from the beginning of how to properly set up your account and how to distribute roles across those accounts. And yeah, it's really great. I'll drop it in there.
Next question.
Cherry Cheetah again from Dallas this time. There have been a few times over the past few weeks when we've had insufficient capacity warnings when trying to spin up a G4DN instance in regions, Ireland and Virginia specifically. Does anyone know of what's going on there?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, Tucker's using them all. No, just kidding. He's got a big project, but we were laughing in our little group that it was Tucker, but he said he's not in those ones. But yeah, it's a good idea to build out your VPC in a couple different places. So have one in Oregon, one in Virginia, or Ohio is one of the ones that seems to be less used. But remember, these are physical machines, so there's only so many G4DN. So if you plan on doing this stuff, you need to request those reservations early and then spin them up early. So it can be expensive, but what's more expensive is not being able to do your show. So even spinning up 12 hours ahead of time to make sure that you're online. Because once you're online, once your machine is running, they can't take it down unless it's a spot instance. So yeah, spin up early and have a backup data center, and try to put all your stuff in S3 so that you can copy all those. So mount your S3 bucket and be able to toss between different places easily, so you're not having to re-upload all your local stuff, especially if they're big, heavy files.
Go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things I could see it being caused by is the creation of the new VT instances. We don't know if they opened up new server capacity in the data centers for those, or if there was a huge shift from Twitch from other instances to G4DNs while they migrated to VT ones. But while they're migrating, it could be that the capacity is a bit lower than normally.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says AWS has Ground Station for downlinking and processing satellite data. How can we use that service when we can't downlink video data?
I don't know. We have an answer for that. You might have stumped us, Douglas. You got to have one every once in a while. Go ahead, Jonas.
I mean, you can still get all the other data. There's a lot of stuff you can do with satellite data where video is not that important. Weather data, just because they tell you there's no video feed doesn't mean they don't transmit images or other data to you. Research project, if you have a really strange requirement to send your data from the middle of some remote area to a satellite and then back to AWS, that could be an use case.
Next question.
Stuart F. in Melbourne, Australia says, let's cover the basics. If there's time, can someone demo spinning up an instance and showing the basic steps to getting a virtual machine running?
Go ahead, Jim.
I'd be happy to do that in perhaps like an after-hours session, so we could schedule one and just kind of go through the various steps. So I could spin up a dedicated account for that, and we can spin up Windows instances and Linux instances and do it manually via the console and perhaps a CloudFormation script, which is my preferred way. So let's get that on the calendar.
Yeah. What if we might have these sessions? This is just an idea that we could have these sessions once a month where we just answer questions. And then we schedule right after it is just a couple hours of after hours that is just, we're just going to talk through some of those things. If that, on that once a month kind of thing, we're just going to kind of hack through it. And we can do it earlier on this one to do that, but we could do it on the same day. That way people kind of know. Does that make sense to everyone?
AWS workshop right afterwards.
Yeah. So we'll do AWS workshops. Maybe we'll keep on thinking about 8 workshops around the hour of the session to make sure that you have no time to do anything else. That's office hours where it's all us and nothing else. All right, next question.
Ari Balak in Tel Aviv, Israel, saying, Jim Hankins, what would be your recommended go-to stack of AWS certifications that would be the most relevant for virtual production?
Go ahead, Jim.
Just collect them all. Collect them all. I would start with the AWS Cloud Practitioner to just get a kind of lay of the land. It's kind of the entry level one, and then decide kind of from there which direction you want to go. Where you're going to spend your time. Because there are certifications that focus on DevOps, which is more of like infrastructure automation, and then there's more architecture, which is heavy in the scenarios. Company A wants to do X, Y, and Z. How do you get there? So yeah, I'd start with the Cloud Practitioner and then see what you think after that.
Next question.
MJ Maltby in Denver, Colorado says, will Media Live output SRT to external CDNs?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Not at this point in time. They do add a support for SRT ingest. I can't find any option to do SRT out. And actually, Media Live doesn't support SRT ingest. You need to use Media Connect with SRT, and then Media Connect can connect to Media Live. But as soon as you're in the cloud and you stay in the cloud, it should be pretty stable from the networking, so you might not actually need SRT.
Next question.
Andy Carluccio, our friend in Washington, D.C., says, my customers have started running Zoom ISO in the cloud on Mac OS instances. Other than costs, what are the challenges they're going to face, especially with NDI?
NDI. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's any specific challenges. You should be able to get the NDI out. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I played around a little bit with it when AWS announced Mac, and definitely had some issues around display protocols and trying to get a few different things running. It's really on AWS particularly. It's designed for a development platform, like developer, iOS developing and Xcode and things like that. And so it wasn't quite the same as like what's that one, the Mac Stadium, or there's a few other services where you can get sort of a more of a direct connection to it, and you can control it a bit better. But yeah, in theory, they're Intel Mac, and so the NDI will work on that network and get it into the virtual network, and you'll see those NDIs pop up.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonas.
Might run into issues as soon as the latency goes over 10 or 20 milliseconds, just because the NDI spec isn't really built for that. Yeah, just try it. What you could do is run test source on the Mac instance and then run the NDI analyzer on the Windows PC, because there you can run 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or even longer tests, and it will tell you if you have like an issue. So you could run a 24/7 test to monitor that specifically.
Next question.
Spike Rogers in Berlin is up next, and he says, after nearly 2 years of experimenting with AWS production, what production elements do you think simply just work better in the hardware?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so I'll caveat that I don't have 2 years of experimenting with AWS production. I've got 10 years or so in AWS in a kind of a different world. But I guess my first observation may be complex audio. And I think that will be a short-lived limitation. I think we'll soon see things that you could do like in a BSS 806 in the cloud. It may already exist, and someone will tell me about it. But yeah, that's my take.
Now go ahead, Grant.
So from day one of office hours, we've had the ongoing debate about software versus hardware production. And I think that there's kind of an extra half step on that, and that's cloud production, because it's kind of an extension of software production is cloud production. So if you were to say what are the advantages of hardware, well, often it's tactile control, right? It's actually hitting nice big buttons and moving faders up and down nicely and things like that you just don't have. And so people go back and forth about vMix. You can do all these amazing things, and you can do all this amazing routing and all that stuff. And it's great when it works. And then when something goes wrong, there's a big problem, and it's hard to find. Because we often talk about in hardware, we're talking about having dedicated pieces of hardware that are doing a single task. And what we're doing in software is often doubling up and having single pieces of software doing a whole bunch of tasks. And then we do that in the cloud, and we have a whole bunch of things all happening in this cloud. And Jonas does amazing setups of having backup solutions and trying to limit. I love the way that you do this, Jonas, with the vMix and just saying, okay, I'm going to use this vMix instance to do switching, and then I'm going to do a whole nother one that's just doing streaming. So things like that makes a whole lot of sense. At the end of the day, though, having tactile control is what's going to be interesting is that hybrid where you've got tactile control of cloud production. That'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's just complex pipelines. And so there's certain kinds of pipelines that, like I do a lot of HDR and immersive, and those things are not, super supported right now in the cloud. So it's very hard to do that process there. Also, there is a lot of processing. Like, okay, so I need a true hardware solution to do, HDR conversions or LUTs or all kinds of other things that are there. Or I need to convert a very complex set of audio chain to something else. Those kinds of solutions. And the problem you get into is if you go into the cloud, those solutions don't exist, so you just can't do them. You can't get here from there. And so by having hardware, you go, oh, I'm just going to buy another 1U dedicated box that does the thing that needs to be done. And I'm going to have this thing that does the thing that needs to be done. And right now, I have a lot more options to get those things in hardware than to try to find them on software to make that work. And so when you're really in these really complex and robust systems, also, I've got a ton of cameras. Let's say I'm at a location, I've got 20 cameras. It's not really practical to put 20 cameras into the cloud to cut them, from a given location at 4K, 60 or whatever, or more. And so it's better to do it, at the location and then take the output. So there's the things that I work on a lot still are lean more towards hardware. I know that I'm going to end up, going into the cloud. Like I know that all the stuff that I'm doing, because it's, we thought about doing that for a decade and we've been thinking about it, and eventually it's going to be 2110. I'm just going to push it all in and I'm just going to, just do the whole thing there. It's just that all the tools have to be there to do that. And right now they're not quite there yet. But what I love is that there's tons of people in our group that are doing what can be done in the cloud right now. And I'm, I'm drafting on all of you. So I'm sitting here while, I'm just sitting there watching the whole thing and letting it sink in about how it works. And I'm looking for places that I can do that and so on and so forth, so that I'm ready, so that as soon as that moment comes, I don't have to, it's not another 5 years of me trying to figure it out. So it's exciting. Go ahead, Jonas.
A complex 24/7 systems might be still better in hardware, maybe in a co-location in a data center, but cloud is amazing in taking spikes, but your basic Rumble might be better situated in your hardware, and also in-room stuff. People are tried it, sending it up and down again, it never works. If you don't need to go out to the internet, I would not go into the cloud.
Right. Absolutely. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia wonders whether there are any other alternatives similar to vMix that can be considered to run on AWS.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a couple different ones. On the high end, there's VisVector, which is basically running a TriCaster in the cloud. Other options, I use Livestream Studio, which works pretty well. It's a little more limited than vMix, but if you're doing simple things, it's really solid. And I have a Livestream Enterprise account, so shooting right over to Livestream, it works really well. And for embedding and having clean whitelisted embeddable video. The other one is Wirecast, which I just got one of their hardware pieces to start banging on that again. I'm hearing good things about the latest build of Wirecast. So it had a bad rap there for the last couple of builds. So that's another one. And then if you're running, OBS, you can just, at the free level, you can cut with OBS and ingest NDI, ingest SRT, kick it back out. And if you want to run a Mac in the cloud, you can do Mimo Live.
Run.
I fold.
Go ahead, Jonas.
So apart from the obvious ones, there's also BBC Brave, which is a basic audio video editor. It's really basic, but it works on top of the GStreamer framework. So it's something that works pretty good. It's still in development, but if you're more adventurous, you might want to try that one. Then there's a similar one developed by the German Chaos Computer Club called Voc2Mix. That also works pretty good for conferences, especially. And there was one other, Snowmix, which is basically the same.
Sienna.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back in with, will the office hours organization provide access to AWS resources for those interested in learning with reduced risk?
Eventually. Yeah, I mean, once we get the organization stood up and approved, and all the paperwork's in now, by the way. There's lots of paperwork, but it's all like we're just now waiting for our certification. But once we get that done, it'll take time for us to build up. It'll infrastructure and so on and so forth. But we do want to provide a lot of opportunities for people both to get access to hardware, to get access to AWS stuff, to take what everyone's learning here and try to buffer it up a little bit and make it easier for people to learn all of this stuff together. So that's going to be really the mission of the organization, is to have us all learning together. Next question.
Brett
go ahead, Guy, real quick.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I have this dream of just being able to suck all these boxes that we're seeing out now, just like we do with Office Hours 2.0, but up in the cloud, but then having Wirecast, Livestream Studio, vMix, and all these different instances, because once the streams are up there, NDI, we could just pull them multiple times, and it would be really cool to just be like, hey, who wants to cut in Livestream today and cut your own version of the show, so they can do a 2-up box, or maybe somebody's calling shots and everybody's got a different show, but they're listening to one TD call the shots. That would be amazing.
And we have the bandwidth where we are to do that. So it's not out of the question. I'm trying to get one thing working first, but then once we get that working, having that stream up and doing multiple, things around it is something I'm totally interested in, to kind of constantly use it almost as a Rosetta Stone. You could spend a day doing it in different things and just learn how the same thing gets done in different orders. But that's a great project. So we'll keep that in the back hopper as soon as we get things a little bit more stabilized. Next question.
Brett Dykus in New York City is up next. Is there a good solution to play back a video file with captions as an SRT or VTT file, as there were a live event within AWS's workflow?
Go ahead, Jonas.
You can't do it with a separate file in Media Live, but you should be able to do it with a separate file with baked into the MP4 file with MediaLive if you can do that. Otherwise, there's not really a case where you can upload VTT files to be restreamed. You could do that if you just upload it to Media Package and just want to have it streamed as a video on demand. But if you want to simulate a live stream, I don't think that's possible at the moment.
There might be a way to do it with segmented frames inside of HLS. I mean, you may be able to package them all in HLS, because when we send them up, you have the video and the audio and the captions are all in their own separate file systems inside of the HLS, segment. You may be able to a way to replay that, but that would be the only way I could think of it off the top of my head. Next question.
John Barker again in Malmo, Sweden. Having now done lots of productions with AWS, has anyone found that it has been cost effective versus buying dedicated hardware?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think I'll cover this in a different angle. So if you're building a service on AWS and that service needs to be resilient, it needs to check all the boxes for compliance, those kinds of things, I think you'll be hard pressed to be able to do it for less money than you would be able to do it in a cloud service such as AWS. Your mileage may vary depending on the frequency of the number of shows you're doing. I think Jonas kind of touched on that earlier when you're doing a comparison between hardware and a cloud service. But the resilience, I think, is the big thing. How important is it to you in your ability to deliver a service that can continue without interruption?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Definitely. I do a lot of special projects. So I get hired to develop a specific workflow for one specific event that does one specific thing, and after that, nobody needs it anymore. If I would buy the specific hardware I need for that all the time, it would get really costly and nobody needs that hardware. With AWS, I can spin it up and spin it down again after the event. But like I said, for spikes, it's amazing. But if you have a daily 24/7 show, hardware would probably still be cheaper.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I've got a good example for you, and that is because we can't record breakout rooms in Zoom, I had a week-long event, pre-event, where we were pre-recording all of these conference presentations. So we were doing 4 rooms for basically 7 days straight. And what I wanted is we were doing local records, but I just wanted a backup kind of cloud recording of each one of those rooms. And so I had to do screen capture, and I was doing a dual screen. So I had these 4 instances, G4 instances, and I had dual screen going, and I was doing a screen capture and actually had some nice software that was screen capturing, and it would every half an hour it would do a segment, and then it was just saving to Dropbox. And anyway, so that actually worked really well, except at the end of the day, it cost me about, I don't know, $300 or $400. And it just made me think, I was right on the borderline of like, I probably could have pulled together 4 machines sitting in another location that were doing that same thing. And I wouldn't have had to spend that money. And
then those machines.
And that's the thing. And if I was, the other massive advantage is that it's sitting in AWS with awesome, backup internet, and the internet was great, and of course the power and all of that as well, and secure location. All of those things are need to be thought of. But it's why I was on the fence about it, But if I was doing that, as Jonas said, if I kept doing that day in, day out, then hardware would win out.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about 2 things. One is the depreciation, how fast that computer, especially if it's a hot rod, i9, 10th generation, 64 gigs of RAM, all that stuff, it's expensive. And if you're not pushing that machine every day, then what's the use of having all that power? So I love being able to spin up a big monster machine or several to do different things. The other thing is that they're clean machines. When I get into them, they don't have a bunch of bloatware that I have to uninstall and all that. So maintenance of machines, the IT support, you're not dealing with that person that has to be at your facility maintaining these machines all the time. I mean, dust, power, all this stuff, UPS backups. It's a lot of maintenance, and so unless you want to pay for all that, then that's just a big part that I don't think people budget for long term. 3 to 5 years.
And I really think about the ability to do, again, I bid on something that we didn't do, but when it really opened my eyes to like this incredible, the idea that we could open up, 200 rooms and manage it and then pipe all this stuff in, and all that stuff had to be done in AWS. Like I wasn't even thinking about like whether, I was just figuring who in office hours was going to help me build this. There was no concept of, but there was hardware on the ground in different locations, in what we were going to do. So the idea is this mixture of, I'm going to put hardware where it makes sense. I'm going to put the cloud where it makes sense, but I can create these incredibly, scaling projects, out, is something that's it's really exciting, to mix and match them. So I think a lot of times we get into this either or thing, but we want to always think of it as, because I think that there's a lot of that interaction. Next question.
John Barker in Malmo, Sweden says, I've found explaining cloud workflows to people is very difficult right now. Any tips for making it super clear for others?
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, John, there's a really good piece of software online. It's called Here to Record Gear. And so what you can do, what you can do is you can really
John,
label it out.
You have to Google it. You have to Google it, John, to find it. But it's pretty high up on the list.
If you go to the latest episode of MacBreak Weekly, you'll hear Alex talk about it as well, and so you might be able to learn a few things here. Yeah, it's great. But honestly, I think that there is something about doing workflows like this, but also just take away the idea that it's cloud, and just say that it's software, right? And it just happens to be running on someone else's computer.
And Jonas, are those instances that you built inside of here in Gear, or are they already there?
Right now there isn't really cloud in HDR Gear. I'm forcing it to do it, so these are all Ethernet connections instead of protocol. But those are really easy to build, and maybe, who knows, John and I will.
If we could only talk to the developer. If the developer was only like listening to the show, if they were listening to the show, what we would say is the way to make it clearer would be to put the instances and work with Jonas and other folks to put the proper instances in so that we could use Gear to do it. Or maybe call it, the question is, do we call it cloud? Or do we
John's done a softball question. I think he got us all talking about his product. I think that's what's happened there.
And he deserves it. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up and says, Grass Valley allows users to connect K-frame panels to the AMPP cloud switching engine, and he's got a link there. Wouldn't there be a latency issue with the panel far away from the engine?
The latency can be if you have a really good connection, and if you're going to pay for AMP, you're going to have a really good connection. Like don't buy it. If you're doing Grass Valley work, you're going to have a less than 10 millisecond connection to it. So I would say that it's still faster than the human latency is in somewhere in the 150 millisecond range by my experience. And so anything less than that, you're going to kind of tap through it. So I think that you'd be okay. Maybe sports get a little more complicated, like high performance sports but even then we've seen stuff done pretty effectively. So I don't think that would be too much of a problem. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, would a tool like Cloud Nuke, and he's got a link there, be useful to guard against unexpected zombie resources causing excessive bills?
Go ahead, Jonas.
It's for our productions, we don't have automated teardowns, so it's just if you go on location, you have plan in time for building it up, you plan time in for tearing it down. If you listen to us producing Tony's show today, you hear me calling out instances that are up, and you hear us not starting to talk to other people till we have confirmation for each of the instances that are down. If you have a protocol and a workflow, how you turn down all your instances, check 5 minutes after you turn them down. It's really not that scary, the bill shock anymore. I have alerts, everything. I'll get notified before I hit huge numbers. What they talked in that specific article about is automation, and then the automation failed in the rollback. Normally that automation should have alerted them, and not just let instances running 24/7. And it's a really niche use case where that helped them save $200. But yeah, it can help, but it isn't really that useful because we don't want automation turning off our instances.
Yeah, and I will say that, when we're in production, we're used to lots of things that that you have to turn on and off, that you have to pay attention to. You have call times and you have things. I once forgot to turn on, not forgot, but I was once 5 minutes late turning off 75 union instances at a location. That was expensive, a lot more expensive than any union bill. Any expense, any AWS bill. So, so you call times and end times and meal breaks and everything else. We're used to lots of processes, that you have to kind of fit into it. So it is like with great power comes great responsibility, and you just have to kind of pay attention to that process. Next question.
John Preto in Las Vegas, and here on the panel says, how many of you have had regional AWS outages like me?
Go, Jim.
I've not experienced a regional outage that impacted me, but I've designed systems that were resilient for regional outages. And I will put a link into the Makana for the reliability pillar. But the one thing you'll want to think about is, a region is at a single kind of administrative area or zone. And there have been some pretty high vis outages back a number of years ago in the US East region where somebody made a mistake that took out like a lot of stuff that other components relied upon. So when you're designing a resilient service, you definitely want to look at, especially if it's a hosted service, it's going to be running 24/7. Maybe it's going to be doing, SOS messages or something like that. You'll want to make sure that you take a long, hard look at that. And the top level service that often comes into play for that, kind of the front door to the service, is AWS Route 53. It's a DNS service that supports health checks and allows you to essentially fail over to a completely different AWS region. So fun stuff.
Yeah. John?
You took the words out of my mouth, Jim. We've been on AWS since the early days when East went down completely. That was part of our infrastructure. Then we moved over to West in Oregon, and we had issues up in Oregon as well. And so they've come a long way since then. But they do go down from time to time. That's what my point was.
Yep. Next question.
Marty Atias in Maryland and occasionally on the panel here says, besides AWS, what other cloud services are out there that could fulfill the same needs, and are they priced differently?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's Azure, which is basically Microsoft's data centers. And the benefit of those ones is that those are regular Microsoft PCs, so regular Windows.
We'll come back to Guy. Go ahead, Jonas.
Macs, but predominantly that's what Azure is. Sorry, did you? Oh,
we lost you there. You go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah. So what?
Okay.
Go ahead, Guy.
Sorry. Yeah, and then there's Google Cloud, and then there's Paperspace as well.
Yep, there you go. Jonas?
There are lots of different providers that give you a server, like Linode, 1&1, Ionos is in Germany. But what is really great with AWS is the VPC networking, that you are able to network all those different PCs together. And it's important that you keep in mind not to put all your eggs in one basket. And for example, while Jim likes the AWS VPN, I started to look into other VPNs, and we are now using, a lot of us are using the pre-tunnel VPN because it's a bit cheaper and we can turn it off, and we like some of its features more. So just keep open and looking at different stuff. We are using Cloudflare for some CDN stuff, and using the cloud provider for what it's for the one thing they can do best for that thing is really clever. So AWS is amazing for media production because they spend so much money and time on their product, but for other stuff, other cloud providers might suit you better.
Next question.
Bill Hops in San Jose has our last one in the regular queue. Are there any AWS live streaming services that support multiple language audio translations?
Yeah, go ahead, Jonas.
I happened to play around with audio languages the last few days, and dLive does support multiple channels. So for example, Jim can send up to 16 audio channels, and what you then can create is multiple encodes. And the cool thing is you could even do something where you have the program audio on channel 1 and then 15 different languages. And in theory, you could also mix those in the cloud, because you can remix different audio channels into different audio encodes. You can do up to, I think, 32 audio encodes, but those can be then spread about a lot of outputs. So it's really scalable for that.
Yeah, and that's one of the big advantages. The new UHD link is that it's one little box, this tiny little box that's going down to the office today to do Office Hours 2.0. But this little box will do, you can put 16 channels of audio onto it. So you got a Zixi ingest of all your physical channels. And then once they're up there, you're able to just kind of start, basically peeling them out. Remember, you can set, each channel to left and right. So, if you want stereo, it's a different you have less channels available to you, but otherwise you can just split them all out to make that work. And one of the things that I'm about to start experimenting with is in immersive is thinking about rethinking where we put the translation, because right now what we do is we duck, we have the, everything in the center channel, and then you duck things in and out of the center channel. But when I was working in the Vatican, when the Pope speaks, someone leans over his shoulder and like does a Spanish translation while they're doing it. And I was like, it'd be really cool if we just use the side speaker on a 5.1, just take take right surround and just put the translation into there, and just have it kind of someone whispering in your ear what the translation is. And so that's something we're going to experiment with a little bit in the near future here. But yeah, you can do a lot of really interesting, processes as far as that goes. And we'll probably talk about this more as it becomes a little bit more mature, as we figure this stuff out. So, but translation, especially when you're doing global streams, thinking about those is really useful. There's the typical ones in the US where it's like English, Spanish. Then the next step up from there is the UN6. You can just search UN6 translations. When you get over that, it gets political. If you go over, because it's just like, well, why didn't you include my language? Why isn't there Swahili in the mix? And so, which is because Swahili is a big, spoken by 90 million people. And so anyways, you have this. Who's available and what areas you're targeting and everything else, but it gets more complicated. But I think the most we've streamed is like 18 languages, which is more complicated because we can't put them all in the same SDI. Go ahead, Grant.
Just to your point about at different locations of sound coming from, like even just in my space when I've been running some larger events, I've found it really helpful to, I've often got like comms right in my ear, and then I've got program audio that's happening, in a couple of speakers. And then actually I want to hear the green room a little bit as well. And the best way I've found is to have a whole nother set of speakers over in the corner somewhere, and that's doing that. And so actually having a whole bunch of physical isolation on that sound makes it actually really possible to manage all of that in your head. Whereas trying to do different mixes or different levels or things like that, it just does not work. But having physical separation, which you could do in surround, makes it possible.
The interesting thing is that it is, I've been amazed at how, we're kind of going off the rails, but this is the last question, so we'll do it anyway. What I'm really interested in is how a set of headphones, you can put the headphones on, and I've been previewing 714, and the fact that I can hear the left, or right, right up, front up or whatever, right back or what, and it sounds like it's above me, and it's headphones. I'm like, I don't understand how that, I'm like that, like magic. But what's interesting is if you start listening to immersive audio mixes, the first thing that you start to notice is how much you can hear every instrument. They're not all muddy. So they're placed in different places in your head or around you. And you can hear I can hear this. You can just hear things more clearly. And I've really been thinking about how that's going to work when it comes to that type of thing where we can put extra audio in different places. I can imagine someone going, because I know that like Brian Maddox will pan things just right, left. so that he knows whether it's production or client or program, or, like if it's right down the center, I think it's program, and then it's us is on one side and clients on the other. And so he kind of lets him know where he's at. But I could see a personal, renderer that just gets the channels, all the channels are coming back as a return to you, and it's mixing them all into a thing. Because the way we, with the studio technology belt packs, they're just Dante back to them. And I've been thinking, and we just bought some new ones, specifically got the 5-pin so I could do stereo. And the reason that I'm doing 5-pin is so that we can potentially have renders that are coming back to you. And you can say, oh, I'd really like to have the client, I'd like to have this channel like up here. just like move it to where each person wants their comms to sit.
Higher, a little bit higher, please. Little bit.
Yeah. Right there. That'd be part of your comm setup, just because being absurd is what we do. So anyway, but I will say that if we had a bunch of people that got used to that, it would be really hard to go back. You just get used to, I have all the comms and they're all around me. So anyway, we'll see. All right, great questions from our producers. Really well done, and thank you to our AWS experts who were kind enough to show up and answer a lot of those questions. It's a little bit of a throwing the ball where the receiver isn't yet. Like when I just we're going to do an AWS, and I hope that the panelists show up, and they did. And so really, really well done. Thank you so much for your contribution there. And anyway, so we're going to jump into the after hours. Remember, tomorrow we're going to talk about, getting the most out of this. And then a reminder, I didn't get it out in the email, but on Saturday at noon, just remember the Belfast method will be lighting up again. And I promised it for those who are setting up, I promised to open it up early, so you have plenty of time. All right, we're jumping into after hours.